In your manifesto, your party manifesto, when it has to do with tackling poverty, that aspect of creating a safety net for every citizen, your party say they will give 25 million Nigerians stipend every month. He says here, create a phased social insurance scheme to assist certain groups in the population with social welfare payments through a phased program. And then it says starting with people under 30, it goes on. How? Because I mean, yes, you've spoken about this in some forum, but could you tell us how much is this going to cost your party, and how do you want to pull it off?
Okay, let me explain very quickly. That program is a conditional cash transfer program, and is to lift 25 million of the extremely poor, the poorest Nigerians, that's Nigerians who earn less than 200 naira a day, to take care of themselves and their families. And that's a huge program to take them out of poverty. The reason why that is important is because you have 110 million, in fact, by current statistics, 119 million extremely poor Nigerians. So you've got to have a big program to take them out of poverty. And how do you deal with that? The fastest way of dealing with it is a conditional cash transfer. And what we say is this, that we will give 5,000 naira to the poorest 25 million over a phased period, 5,000 naira if their children are enrolled in school, and that's the conditional cash transfer, if their children are enrolled in school, and secondly, if their children participate in immunization. So you're actually doing two things. You're giving a stipend to the very poorest, and you're also ensuring that in order to earn that stipend, they satisfy two conditions: enroll children in school and have their immunization. They participate in immunization.
But if you say 25 million Nigerians, and then there's a condition, if they participate in immunization, if they're in
that's
school,
extremely, that's a conditional cash transfer scheme.
But how did you arrive at 25 million Nigerians? Is that like?
No. We decided on a figure which we can deal with in the first phase. Now that phase, we're looking at phasing it over a period, but it will cost about 1.35 trillion to do so every year. If we do all 25 million at once. If we do all 25 million at once, it will cost 1.35 trillion. But we're looking at phasing it. We're looking at, even if you can do 5 million a year and then incrementally increase that, so that in 4 years we're able to do 25 million, just phased over a 4-year period. And depending, of course, on resources, you can even do more. 1.35 trillion, by the way, it seems like a large sum of money. But when you compare it, I mean, for example, look at the AMCON bailout. The AMCON bailout costs, and this is bailing out persons who are in debt, many well-heeled businesses and businessmen, costs 5.3 trillion, 5.7 trillion to do that. That's the bailout of the relatively wealthy. And frankly, if it's going to cost you 1.35 trillion to bail out 25 million of the poorest Nigerians, I think it's well worth it.
And there are two things, because those are the ones create jobs and then employ people.
Yes.
But these ones,
and not necessarily create jobs. And somebody who is involved, let's take an example of someone involved who is doing business, does his own business, importation, sale and retail of business, say kerosene, earns a subsidy, right? Earns a huge subsidy, makes money from a huge subsidy. Yes, such a person owes money, has buildings, has all sorts of assets, and then, owes large sums of money, and he's bailed out when he owes the money. That kind of bailout, is necessary for the individual. Look at the individual who is completely helpless or powerless, and you give them 5,000 naira a month. It's an injection into the economy. It enables them to put in some money into that economy, because they've got to buy things with that money. This is government's way of not just energizing the local economy, but also ensuring that people are empowered, that the very poorest are given a real chance in life. That's the way to go.
How does the party plan to raise the money?
Oh, we plan to raise the money from all the resources that we have. And of course we're expanding, we're diversifying, but even looking at our resources. And our position is that the problem with our country is not It's not lack of resources. It's poor management of resources and corruption. And we think that if money is managed well, transparently, in an accountable and transparent way, we will have more than enough resources to do a lot of what we want to do. And again, it's priority. You decide what your priorities are. And that's why I gave the example of bailing out a large number of people, bailing out debtors, and bailing out 25 million people.
What then are your priorities? How are you going to be aligning everything, assuming that you win these elections? There's so much, it would seem, that Nigerians are expecting.
Yes. Nigerians are expecting several things, but you've got to deal with several things at the same time. But then you prioritize your big programs. You simply prioritize what it is that you think you can do, the big program. One of our biggest programs that would involve direct funding from government are not necessarily that much private sector participation, although we expect some private sector participation, even in our conditional cash transfers. The World Bank has a big program. There are several other agencies that we know will join us in doing this. And there are very many examples of this: Colombia, Honduras, several different countries that have done this, whose GDPs, by the way, are even lower than Nigeria. But that's, aside the point. Free education, for instance. We think that free education, primary, secondary, tertiary, but only for science, technology, engineering, and maths, and education in the first phase. We think that all of that is entirely manageable within our resources.
Even free education?
Yeah.
Because I thought for us, good thing, you're an academic.
Yeah.
And to get the best form of education, especially when we talk about tertiary education, you must pay for it. And that same argument was espoused by even Lagos State when they decided to upgrade the state-owned university, LASU.
Yeah.
But if you're saying free education,
Yes.
and I try to marry it with the points given in changing LASU to a first-class university,
Yes.
how does that make sense?
How it works is this. Free education, someone has to pay for it. I think is the better way of putting it. Someone has to pay for it. It's either the student is paying for it, the government is paying for it, someone has to pay for it. And that's why we've decided at the tertiary level on a phased program. That's free education for science, technology, engineering, and maths, and education. That's for teachers. The reason is that ties in with our economic policy for quickly advancing industrialization, quickly advancing technology. So the free education, and our educational program is described as free and relevant education. We must tie that in with our overall economic policy. So in the first phase, that's what we're going to be able to afford to do. Science, education, science, technology, education, engineering and maths, and for teachers as well, for education. So it just depends on what you think you need to do. And I think that government has to invest in education. Everywhere else in the world where people have managed to do anything about education, government's investment has to be significant. Even where people are required to pay, even where you require people to pay, you give huge loans. And many times you run the risk that those loans will not be paid back.
Why sciences? It would seem as if you've done your research on that, and I decided, why did you choose to look at that particular field?
Well, first, it really has to do, it ties in with the whole, our industrial policy. We need to be able to move forward quickly in technology and in the sciences. These are areas where there are huge deficiencies at the moment. We need to move very quickly in technology. We need to move very quickly in industrialization. Practically everything that would be required to move the country forward in terms of technology, in terms of inventions, in engineering, all the relevant skills are tied to those specific programs. Of course, we're going to move over in the next stage to management sciences, to the arts.
Yeah, I was going to say that I hope that people, your colleagues in your field, will not be up in arms if that happens. But let's look at the immediate. People have predicted all sorts of things for this election. So people have said it will seem that we're caught, speaking very seriously now, between the devil and the deep blue sea. One of the strongest that ever came out, and I think that he also suggested that the peace accord be signed, was from Professor Bolaji Akinyemi, where he spoke about either way, it looks like we're still going to be experiencing violence after the elections. If your candidate wins, and there is some violence experienced, how do you intend to tackle that?
Well, we will, of course, what we've done and what we keep doing is ensuring that what we say to the electorate is that we intend that this election will not cost any lives. We intend that these elections will be as peaceful as possible, and that everyone should exercise restraint. That's what we've done time and time again, and that's what we'll keep doing. But let me say frankly to you that the business of government is the security of lives and property. And everywhere in the world, if you do any kind of survey on elections and violence, post-election, pre-election and post-election violence, responsibility largely lies on the ruling party and the government. They are the ones who must ensure that they create as much as possible a level playing field, especially where security is concerned. They must create a level playing field. You can't have a situation where you control all the forces, all the forces, where you control every coercive power, and then you throw up your arms in the air and say, well, let's see what the other people will do. You control all coercive powers, control the army, the police, all the forces. That is why the responsibility, the primary responsibility for law and order lies on the ruling party. When it happens that the ruling party is also in the contest for elections, that responsibility is even greater because they have a real stake in who wins the elections. That responsibility is much, much greater. And I'd like a lot more emphasis placed on the responsibility of government, of the ruling party, to ensure a level playing field, to ensure that the coercive powers of the soldiers, the police, and all of the other armed agencies create a level playing field. They have that responsibility.
We'll take some reactions on this in just a moment, but we'll have to go for the headlines now with Victor Matthias, after which we'll come back and continue. Just keep your comments coming through. We'll hope we can squeeze them all in. But for now, Victor, over to you.